Good afternoon. Hey, hey. That's usually the kind of response I get. Good. Welcome to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. My name is Peter Barberry. I'm the Brodsky Curator of Photographs here at the museum. Today's conversation is our second program in the Art and Social Transformation lecture series, organized in conjunction with the exhibition Zoe Strauss, 10 Years. I want to thank Dina and Jerry Wind for their innovative support of this series. Today's program, like all the others in the Art and Social Transformation series, will be uploaded as a podcast onto the museum website. So if you don't get enough here, you can get more there. Before introducing today's speakers, I want to tell you about the upcoming programs in the series. There are two more after this. On March 4, Zoe Strauss will give a talk about the music and career of Bruce Springsteen. And on March 11, the artist Mark Bradford will talk about his paintings, and his lecture will be followed by a discussion between he and Zoe about parallels in their work and in their relationships to their home cities. Both of those programs will take place at 2:30 p.m. right here in Van Pelt Auditorium. But now for today. Today we are very excited to have Steve Earle in conversation with Zoe Strauss. Steve Earle is a legendary singer and songwriter and a 3-time Grammy Award winner. He is also an author, an actor, and an activist. A longtime political activist, I should say. Mr. Earle's latest recording and his first novel are titled, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. We were just playing the recording as you came in. The book by the same title is available for sale today. It's available in the museum store annex, and if you're interested in buying it, when you exit the auditorium on that side, as soon as you leave the doors, right on your left is the museum store annex, and the book will be available for sale there. I'd also like to tell you that one of the reasons we were able to draw Steve here today is that he is performing tomorrow night in Phoenixville at the Colonial Theater. So go see that. That should be great. Zoe Strauss. Zoe Strauss is, of course, a photographer, renowned for her 10-year project to install exhibitions of her photographs under Interstate 95 here in Philadelphia. That was a project that she completed in 2010. Her photography is now the subject of a mid-career retrospective here at the museum in the Berman and Honickman galleries nearby. If you take a right out of the auditorium and then a left, it's just up the ramp. And I do hope that if you have not yet seen the exhibition that you will. Today, Zoe and Steve are going to have a conversation about art and activism, how the two things overlap, and how sometimes they don't. About halfway through the program, we will open the conversation up for questions from the audience. And one little housekeeping note about question asking. Since we are recording this for a podcast to go on the museum's website, we want to be sure to catch your questions when you ask them. So if you raise your hand and I point to you, please wait. Somebody will come down with a mic and you can pose your question then. So again, thank you for being here today, and thank you, Zoe and Steve, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Peter. Oh, curator, I love you so. I know that's not the right thing to say, but I have to say it. Well, one of the things right before we came on was that what were we going to be talking about, and then I said I had some notes, but I didn't make them. So
I thought it should be a T-shirt.
I'm still thinking it might be. It's a sad mantra often from my life. But one of the things that I wanted to start out with was, Steve, when I met you, it was because we met through KWRU, the Kensington Welfare Rights Union, and also because you were working with Marat, so it was this kind of movement around.
I was in Philly a lot.
Yeah, you were here a lot, and we were very big fans of your music. And we had just met you for once, actually, I believe, and you offered us tickets to a show that you were having in Nashville for our honeymoon.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. See, now,
Now, Philly, don't think I've ever had to actually put you guys on the guest list because I don't think there's any place here that you can't get into once you set your mind to it.
I don't know what you're talking about, actually. I like
It's a KWRU thing.
Yeah, listen, I need to get in where I need to be. What am I going to do? But you know, you offered us tickets to the show, and it was really we're big fans of yours, and we didn't know you, and we both working kind of on the same within the same political structure in terms of activism right there, and it was something that was so generous and so unbelievably moving, and something that I kind of took with me, and I feel like I took forward into my work a little bit, the importance of being accessible and the importance of both being generous and the importance of being able to have exchange with strangers in that manner. And it was something that really, it held on, and it meant a great deal to me and also to Lynn, as many people know, my loving wife, the power behind the throne. So I just wanted to mention that because it was an introduction that really kind of, I think, informed my work as I moved forward. But I really wanted to know about KWRU, which was we were both active, and what was it that drew you to them? And I don't even actually know how you began to become involved.
It was, my main area of activism was against the death penalty. And the death penalty, one of the first things you learn about the reasons why we execute people in this country is that it's completely, that's tied to issues of class more than it is anything else. And it just, because I'd been visible in that world, other activists, after a while, and then email started happening. And, you like, email addresses, you give them to people, and other people give them to people.
Right.
And I started, I guess it was probably, maybe it may have been a WFP connection,
Yeah, that would make
and
sense.
it was Bob or somebody
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
So
it was a union.
yeah, so I'm opposed to the death penalty for anybody, for any reason, for any crime, because it diminishes us. That's kind of not the core of who I am politically, but it's the work that chose me. It's the hard job that sort of put itself in front of me.
Yeah.
As I became more politically active. I've always been political, but I'm a recovering heroin addict, and I've been clean 17 years now. Before I got clean, I was semi-famous, and people asked me, I'd grown up in a pretty political atmosphere. My politics were no different than they are now fundamentally. But my idea of activism was somebody would invite me to a death penalty event, and I would pull up in a limo, and I'd get out and I'd sing a song, and then I'd get back in the limo and fuck off. And I thought that was activism, and you know what? It was. You do what you can do. But after I got clean, you have to be careful about talking about this because there are traditions involved, but in 12-step programs, I can say that, there's, at the core of 12-step, the way 12-step programs work is the concept of service. Service within the program and service outside the program. So because of that, I started, I got involved first with Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation, just because that was a mind-blowing revelation after some of the abuse I'd taken for my views about the death penalty, that there were people who had members of their family, that they lost to violent crimes that were opposed to the death penalty and made it a huge part of their lives to work, against the death penalty. And the way I found out about that was the Dead Men Walking soundtrack, which I participated in, was that benefited originally Murder Victims' Families for Reconciliation, because Sony Music Corporation told Tim Robbins that they would not donate money directly to any organization called the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. They were not willing to have the Sony name attached to that overt statement about that particular political issue. So Tim asked Sister Helen Prejean, who Dead Man Walking was about, if there was a charity that might be less of a problem for a record label in Japan. Japan actually has They don't execute anywhere near as many people as we do, but they're determined to keep doing it more than almost any other country in the world. They're like harder on whales than they are on people, but only slightly. So, you know, I found out, I met those people through doing that. And, you know, I think, you know, after a while, people started coming. I found out about KWRU because somebody invited me to one event, and I can't remember exactly what the first KWRU event I did. I know it was in Philly. We marched around downtown for 3 or 4 hours one day. I do remember that. I have to not get arrested. It's sort of a thing of like half of my livelihood comes from Canada. And I just, for some reason, you know, sometimes when people tell you that they're big in Canada, it's not a joke. And it's a big part of my livelihood. And because Canadian law is very strict about people with criminal records traveling. They keep track of people that have criminal records, and I have one. So it took me a long time to get a paper that said I could travel in Canada after I got out of jail. And so I had to be kind of protected. I made the decision that I'm not going to get arrested in a CD until, you know, when there's a draft and they come after my kids, then maybe I'll do it, you know. But I mean, and I support other people that do it. But for me personally, it's going to take something, you know, I think I can make more noise and do more good, you know, not getting arrested and still being able to eat. So I just, one of these days I may only be able to play in Canada. So I made that decision. So my KWRU events always, somebody was going to get arrested, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been to a lot of KWRU events where Sherry Honkala spoke and everybody spoke, and then I stepped off the back of the stage when the march stepped off.
Correct.
Because now we're going to get arrested. It's that kind of see. Kensington Welfare Rights Union. Is there anybody here not familiar with KWRU? Okay. Kensington Welfare Rights Union is exactly what it says it is. It's a union built on trade union models for people that are welfare recipients. Now, come up with a more unpopular issue than that in this fucking country.
No.
It's based on the idea that everybody has a right to a roof over their head and enough to eat, and therefore, they have a right to form a union to work for those rights. And KWRU, when I first met them, spent a lot of time occupying housing in Philly that had been sitting empty for years and years and years, simply because somebody was waiting for it to become valuable enough to develop. And while there were people on the streets, most homeless people are not people that you see. The people you see out on the street are people that got dumped out of mental health facilities during the Reagan years when all that was defunded. Most homeless people are mothers with children, and they're absolutely invisible to most of us every day, so it's not something everybody worries about. And KWRU was, as a statement and as a matter of practicality, forming communities in vacant housing in Philadelphia. You know, obviously it started in Kensington, and hence the name. The movement goes where it's needed.
I agree. I mean, one of the things about KWRU that I think was, and still is so unbelievable, is that it's both the idea of it and it's actually the enactment of it. And it's something that we need. And Kensington was a place where there were a number of homes that could be occupied. North Philadelphia is filled with homes that are able to be occupied by people. They're actually homes that people can move into with no issues and begin to live there. And so they stay vacant until they begin to collapse, and then the homes adjacent to them also begin to collapse.
Right.
And so KWRU actually not just had a service to poor people, as they like to term it, it's Kensington Welfare Rights, but Poor People Economic, what is the full name? Poor People Economic Rights Campaign.
Right.
And so the whole connection of that to me was very important, and I feel like it was deeply connected also to the political work that I had been doing, but it wasn't direct. It was kind of a movement back to that coming through other human rights stuff.
Right.
So, yeah, it was. I have to say, it was good times, except for the arrests. It was good times, except for that part.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. A lot of my friends get arrested on a fairly regular basis. There's Kensington Welfare Rights Union, I think, is a direct forerunner of Occupy Wall Street, and that kind of civil disobedience. I don't think there's a lot of people that learned their chops, as activists in KWRU that were involved in Seattle. The difference between Seattle and OWS is the difference between the anti-war movement during the Vietnam War and the anti-war movement during the Iraq War. There was a draft during the Vietnam War. It was absolutely vital to the people that were involved in it. If you don't know who Occupy Wall Street are, I left New York City 2 days before they moved into Zuccotti Park, and I came back 2 days before they emptied Zuccotti Park. But I saw OWS sites all over the world, and I know a lot of the people that are still in New York and still holding spokes and general assemblies every single day, and it's still going. And if you want to know who they are at their core, the people that made it happen. They're the first generation to realize they're educated people. They either have degrees or they have 3/4 of a degree and can't figure out a way to pay for finishing it, or they have a degree and they can't find a job in the field that they've been qualified for. But they have computers and they have smartphones and they're fucking dangerous. And they're the first generation that woke up and realized that the door just slammed in their face. And that's why it's working, and that's why it's sustaining itself when Seattle didn't. A lot of the people in Seattle, there were people that might have stayed with that there was a job for them, and they went and they took the job the next year. But there aren't any jobs now. And so the world's changing really, really fast right at this moment as we're in here.
I know, I feel like one of the things, I'm just going back to KWRU for a moment to say that Sherry Hunkler, who was the head of KWRU when we were both active with it, at one point had been forbidden from walking along the stretch of sidewalk that surrounds Independence Hall. And
Right.
that if she stepped onto the sidewalk there, she was to be arrested. And part of the idea of this insanity was that it was a great forerunner of the idea of occupying public space and the idea of who was going to be able to say who can be in this public space.
Right.
It was just fucking nuts.
And, the concept of private property in the sense of as soon as you start privatizing services, essential services, that have always been, government responsibility for a reason. For instance, the subway system in New York was completely and totally private at one time. It was 4 different private railroads that were built by different people and designed to operate at a profit. And the reason that they're part of a public organization now is because it didn't fucking work. There was no way for anybody to make a profit and provide the services for a growing city, and it just didn't work. So the stuff that people are bringing to us as new ideas about privatizing healthcare, privatizing prisons, these things are done, a government is us doing it when it works correctly. And those things became public trusts for a reason. And, you always have to be leery of the concept of a public trust in this country, but it is, just basically those are, it's really important to watch what we're, as people start using those words. But if you're going to do those things, if you're going to privatize stuff that's traditionally in every place else in the world is done by us, done by the government, which is us, it's not them, it's us, then it blurs the lines when it comes to private and public space. Zuccotti Park being a case in point. It was private property, but they made a deal. They made a deal not to pay certain taxes and fees to the city that everyone else would have had to pay in return for donating this space and making it available to the public 24 hours a day. And then they tried to run everybody out of the park based on the idea that, no, it's private property, but no, that line no longer is where it used to be. So be careful what you wish for, because it'll come back to bite you.
Well, I'll punch someone dead in the face, Steve. But, I want to just, I'm just kind of segueing away. You made a statement where you said that making art in America is a political statement in and of itself. And I'm just wondering if you could expound upon that, because I feel like that's very connected to my work and certainly to yours as well.
Yeah, I think Obviously I come from an area of art that at least when I started it, there was a way for me to make a lot of money doing it that didn't have that much to do with, I can make a lot more money than somebody decided to be a painter or somebody decided to be a poet. No more hardcore decision in the world than to wake up one day and decide you're going to be a poet. If you're going to sustain yourself, you're going to teach. That's it. That's basically it. Seamus Heaney taught. Michael Longley taught. That's just the way that works. We have a structure based on Europe here when it comes to supporting arts, but we don't really, but it's a sham. And that's nothing, I don't want to insult anybody in this institution because this is a great thing. There's great art out there. A great artist is being being shown in this museum right now. And I think it's really, really cool. If you haven't seen these pictures, you need to go see them. But every place else in the world funds arts at almost. There are really, really poor countries that spend way more of their budgets on art than we do. We believe, we don't teach music in schools anymore. We're getting where we don't teach theater in schools anymore. We don't fund arts in school. We have always, in the time I've been going to school, we call those subjects electives, music, theater. They're not electives. The difference between human beings and apes is not an opposable thumb. It's the fact that we make and we consume art, period. And it is absolutely sustenance to us. We need art in order to be human, and therefore we should fund art, and we don't. There was a period of time, I lived in Nashville, Tennessee for 33 years, and I made a bluegrass record with the Del McCoury Band. I love bluegrass music. I love old-time music. I love folk music. I'm basically a folk singer. And there was a point at which, during the Clinton administration, where the head of the Country Music Foundation was made head of the NEA. And everybody in Nashville was just beside themselves saying, oh, that's really great. Bluegrass and old-time music's going to be recognized as art. That's really cool. Fact of the matter, there's 5 guys in a bluegrass band. Doesn't take that much money to fund bluegrass when it gets right down to it. Orchestral music was defunded during that period. Number one, the NEA was gutted and basically couldn't do anything but introduce an artist to a corporation. That happened effectively during that administration. Orchestral music, if you put an orchestra on stage, there's virtually no way that you can pay for that by selling tickets at a ticket price that anyone could afford. It's just too many mouths to feed. Jesse Helms, the war on art and funding, public funding of art that Jesse Helms waged successfully during the Clinton administration was not just about homophobia, just because he thought, because Robert Mapplethorpe's book freaked him out. That's not what it was about. He was certainly homophobic enough. But what he really was saying was that our government, and our tax dollars should not be used to fund art that Jesse Helms didn't understand. And he didn't listen to classical music, so he didn't think it should be funded. It's really that simple. That's really dangerous. There's no other civilized country in the world where a government thinks that way. It's sort of taken for granted that art costs money to do and that artists deserve to eat. But
Right.
It's also about us and what we're able to teach our children and the values we're able to pass on to our children about what's important and what's not. These things aren't just, aesthetics aren't window dressing. They're part of the world that we create for ourselves, and they're really, really, really important. So in this environment is so hostile to artists that, making any kind of art, deciding you're going to, get up and write a book or paint or any of that stuff is a political statement in and of itself in the United States of America.
Steve and Zoe, can I break in here? We're about ready to open things up to the audience for questions.
That's okay
but
with me. Do you want to
if-
read?
if-
Yeah, do you want to do this, sir?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
really want.
Y'all want to hear something from this real quick before we do that?
Yes, yeah, the answer is yes.
Sorry, this is something that we're both pretty passionate about, so it's like you gave us a fucking soapbox.
I know.
So-
And look, and this is good because neither of us shut the fuck up. So I have to
Yeah,
say right now,
I know.
Steve,
All right.
I'm loving this.
Yeah, I know. What, telling me to shut the fuck up? I know.
No, I'm pleased because I'm not. I could
People
just
will
keep
pay money
going.
for that. This is my book. It's called I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. And it's, I started out to write a book about Hank Williams' ghost. It ended up being about Hank Williams and heroin and Roe versus Wade. And it's kind of a, it was going to be a simple ghost story, and it turned out to be a kind of a Harry Potter book for adults.
Yes.
No flash photography, please.
This is, there's a real person called Toby Marshall who was a doctor who was traveling with Hank Williams when he died. And this character is loosely based on Toby Marshall, but he's not Toby Marshall. Toby Marshall wasn't really a doctor. He was a quack. This guy, Doc Ebersol, who's the protagonist in this book, he's a defrocked doctor living in San Antonio, Texas in 1963. He's a heroin addict. He supports his habit largely by performing abortions, patching up the odd gunshot wound in the middle of the night. And 10 years earlier, he was traveling with Hank Williams when he died. And Doc has just performed the service that is his main livelihood, and things have been kind of slow. And he's performed this procedure, and he's collected the money, and he's gone to the dope man, and he's gotten himself straight. And he's just settled into his spot in the back of the beer joint in the hopes that lightning will strike twice in the same day. The happy hour crowd began to filter in. Unlike the daytime patrons, these folks were mostly squares who busted their backs all day long, building the houses they could never afford to live in, or repaving perfectly serviceable roads in neighborhoods way across town. They arrived in groups of 3 or 4, drank a pitcher of beer among them, and maybe shot a game of pool before hurrying home in time for supper. It was always one of them who dropped the first nickel in the jukebox. The Mexicans usually played records by the local conjuntos like Santiago Jimenez or Trio de San Antonio, or maybe one of the big mariachi bands from Mexico with blaring trumpets and a singer with a voice to match. Songs about the black-eyed girl they left behind and the beautiful mountains they would never see again. Fine. Sad songs in a language that he barely understood were easy enough for Doc to tune out. He knew some of the melodies by heart and hummed along when he was in the mood. But when one of the redneck boys lurched toward the box, fishing in his Wranglers for a nickel, the hair stood up on the back of Doc's neck. He knew it was only a matter of time before one of these Peckerwoods bellied up to the Wurlitzer and punched in N26. Now you're looking at a man that's getting kind of mad. Had a lot of luck, but it's all been bad. Fuck me, Doc grumbled under his breath. He'd spent a lot of his life in bars all over the South, and it never fucking failed. If you sat there long enough, some asshole would play a Hank Williams record. Old Hank dead and buried beneath 6 feet of rusty red Alabama dirt for the better part of a decade now, still taking their nickels and making them cry. Doc looked around the room. There were construction workers, warehouse hands, soldiers from Fort Sam, and layabouts on disability. They ranged in age from their early 20s to 70-something, but they all loved Hank. They loved him when he was alive, and now that he was dead, they loved him even more. Even the Mexicans loved the son of a bitch, even though most of them couldn't understand what he was singing about. Hank songs were their very own trials and tribulations set to a rock-steady beat that they could dance to. Each and every one believed that old Hank was singing to him individually, or at least exclusively to people like him. Regular folks with kids to raise and bills to pay, most of them overdue. They had no way of knowing that at this very moment, somewhere across town in solid old money Victorian houses in Almas Park and Alamo Heights, doctors, lawyers, and politicians were mixing themselves highballs and cranking up Hank on their hi-fis. Oh, they had plenty of Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole records on their automatic changers, but when they were drinking, only Hank would do. And there wasn't one of them who'd pay a dime to hear any other hillbilly singer in the world. Doc didn't wonder why they all insisted on doing this to themselves. He knew what was getting ready to happen. When one of Hank's records dropped into place on an automated turntable, even the initial rumble of the needle in the well-worn groove sounded lonesome. The crying steel guitar was the bait, but it was the beat that set the hook, and by the time Hank's voice crackled from the speaker, it was too late. There was no escaping now. No matter how struggles strive, I'll never get out of this world alive. Jesus Christ, that voice, that gut-wrenching, heart-rending wail that got down in your bones like a cold, wet day. The keening of a hillbilly banshee heralding imminent doom. That's enough, goddammit, Doc shouted out loud, but only a handful of patrons paid any attention, and none of the regulars even looked up from their beers. They'd all witnessed outbursts from that crazy old man who sits at the table in the back of the joint, but they could never make heads or tails of what he was going on about. He just does that whisper, talks to himself sometimes. Doc pried his fingers loose from the edge of the table and propelled himself through the door and out into the street. It was hot and dark and quiet. The street lights cast elongated shadows on the empty street, out-of-kilter trapezoidal ghosts of simple 1- and 2-story structures that housed respectable businesses once. The pawn shop was a barber shop, a place where people gathered to trade neighborhood gossip and tell tall tales. The abandoned building across the street was a family-owned hardware store. The bins filled with shiny new fasteners and fittings of every description, wing nuts and carriage bolts and 10-penny nails. But like Doc, the buildings were derelict, has-beens, shadows of their former selves waiting around for time to take its slow, steady coal. The familiar fall of faltering footsteps follows behind him. The shuffling echo ceases abruptly each time Doc breaks his stride, but he knows from experience if he turns around, he'll only see his own shadow stretching from sidewalk to sidewalk like a black chasm opening in the middle of the street. So he just keeps on walking, and the ghost follows him all the way home. Thanks.
You told me, Steve.
And if you buy one, I'll sign it.
Thank you so much, Steve. That was incredible. So I think we'd like to hear from the audience. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll get a mic to you. Here's a question right here.
Oh, Sam's doing it.
Actually, I was trying to formulate the question, and the introduction of Hank Jr., of Hank Williams, kind of put it into, sorry, I go back a ways with country music, but that put it in perspective for me, because with Hank, you had I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, which is, will tear your heart out, but you also had Jambalaya or Setting the Woods on Fire, which was joyful. And I was curious, just after looking at your pictures, they're kind of sad to me. And I would like to hear the joy you get out of your work. I want to hear about your joy.
I'm going to just say for myself, I get an enormous amount of joy out of my work, and that's across the board. And often there's many difficult situations that are presented, but to be honest, I am personally always thrilled to be alive. And I often think that that's something that comes through in my work, even when it's a very difficult instance. And I think that that's the common thread, that I'm very interested in pride and a structure of self that kind of comes through, again, even when it's something hard to look at. So there's difficulty for sure, but also side by side with a lot of joy. And I also get a lot of joy out of actually making the images and working on them and the presentation of them. And right now, I'm having a fucking great time doing this. And so pretty much across the board, that's how I roll.
Yeah.
As a leftist, I have unflagging optimism.
Yeah, I think, I wrote a song called John Walker's Blues several years ago, and I caught a lot of shit for it, but I wrote it because I knew I was going to catch hell for it. And I wrote it because I have a 20-year-old son the same age as John Lynn. And my first reaction to see him duct taped to a board was, oh God, he's got parents. And so that's how you connect yourself to art by, to me, art is the stuff that's really means the world to you, but it's the commonality between, what's important to you and what's important to your audience. It's not, in that case, I knew it would piss some people off. I knew some people would not want to hear it, but I knew some people would want to hear it. And I knew nobody else was going to write it. And I think some of the images of Zoe's, and I see, and there's two artists that I see almost everything they do, Tony Fitzpatrick and Zoe, because electronic media allows for that. And I'm on her listserv, and I see a lot of pictures, and she's going places and taking pictures of things that you're not. This world is designed to make sure that if you have any means at all, that you get from point A to point B in your life without seeing shit like in that gallery down there. And sometimes it's the duty of art to show us that.
Right. And what a pleasure it is to be connected.
Question down here in the front row.
I just like the yellow. Oh, there's my high school English teacher. Hey, shut up.
This is for either of you, or both of you. There probably is a certain choir that you know that you can preach to and convey a message. There are people who are going to just get it because they've enjoyed your work in the past, and they'll keep enjoying it. What is the challenge that you face to preach beyond the choir and either create photographs or characters in songs or characters in novels that we'll all already love because we like what you do, but to reach a new audience or, as I said, preach beyond the choir?
Well, I mean, I'd like to think that my audience was, and people have made the mistake and actually thrown money at me making the mistake that my audience was regular working people for the most part in the middle of America. My crowd's pretty much an NPR crowd, at this point in my career. And, and I freak some of them out. But I do, I think consistency is part of it. I think when I started working on the death penalty, there's, it was the most unpopular issue you could possibly imagine. And, you do rallies or go to executions, vigils, and there'd be 10 people there. And it changed because of stuff that's not the reason I'm opposed to the death penalty. If you execute people, you're going to execute innocent people, and that's why it changed. And I was not one of the abolitionists that was against that. I was for anything that kept anybody from dying on any death row anywhere in America or the world. But things did change. But without us, everybody that was there from beginning with Gary Gilmore's execution in 1977, I wasn't there, but a couple of the people that taught me, about that issue were. And, without those people standing there and taking that heat for all that time, I don't think we get to this point that we're at right now. So, the choir, yeah, you're preaching to the choir. I'll tell you what, I made a record called The Revolution Starts Now, made it to get out before the election in 2004, and, then we lost. And it became my tour, which started, right as, we headed for Europe on the day after the election, which was really good, gave us a break. And then we came back and we toured the States, and we became a recovery room for people that had worked their asses off and hadn't come up with the result that they wanted. So sometimes it's just like a USO show. It's just like entertaining the troops, and that's okay too.
There's a question way in the back on the left there, on my left.
Oh, she's had her hand up ever since.
I'll see her.
Yeah.
This is for Steve. It's well known that Townes Van Zandt was one of your biggest mentors. And I'm just curious, what his greatest influence on you, how he shaped you as a man or an artist or an activist? And finally, did you ever learn the Wabash Cannonball?
I didn't hear the very last part.
Did you ever finally learn the Wabash Cannonball?
Oh, I haven't learned the Wabash Cannonball just because I was around. It's like, well, we won't even go into that. That'll get really weird. But Roy Acuff was kind of an asshole, so I've never learned the Wabash Cannonball. But the Townes he's a lot of the reason that I'm who I am. I met him when I was 17 years old. Now, he had a lot of problems. The reason that Townes isn't more famous and that all of you don't know who he was and that everybody doesn't know who he was is his fault. He shot himself in the foot every chance he got. He had perfect aim that far. And he was one of the best songwriters that ever lived. But what I did see is someone that was making art that had made a conscious decision to do what he did, whether he ever made any money at it or not. And this was a time in the 70s when there was a lot of money in the music business, even, for singer-songwriters. I mean, my son is 30 and he makes records, and I can't tell him anything about the music business. It's changed so much. I started making records in the 80s when it was whoever dies with the highest unrecouped figure wins. There was so much money, and it's not that way anymore. But so it's a good thing that I learned really early on that this was something that you do because you love it, and you do it no matter what. I've been lucky, and I made more money than most people do. I've made less than a lot of people, too. And and some of that's because I could have made more money if I hadn't made some of the decisions to make some of the art that I made and to not make a lot of the art that I didn't make, which I'm actually even prouder of, some of those decisions.
There's a question over here on the right.
That's just such a great answer. I can barely handle it, Steve. I love it.
This is for Steve. Sorry you died on Treme, by the way. But
Yeah. It's a bummer. I like that job.
Yeah, I can imagine. At the end of the first season, there's a line where Jeanette says, "Come on, Davis, those are moments. That's not a life."
Right.
And I'm one of those people who woke up for some reason and decided to be a poet. So
Right.
those moments are everything for someone like me, and I think of songwriters in a similar way.
Right.
So I'm curious how you made the transition from writing like a 3.5-minute song to, in terms of your process, into a novel.
Well, I mean, I wrote nothing but songs until 17 years ago when I got clean. And the beginning of that process was a 12-step thing. My sponsor told me to journal, so I started journaling. And so I discovered that I had this stuff. And, I was smart enough for me to know that writing a memoir was not the thing to do because I'd be fucking myself out of a huge amount of material in the future. So I started writing short stories. And the first short stories I wrote were so autobiographical that it's kind of pitiful that I published them as fiction. I mean, probably not since Carlos Castaneda has anybody gotten away with more by not defining the art that they were creating properly or accurately. And I didn't, it's learning to do it and do it halfway, where I wasn't embarrassed by it. It was hard. I mean, I was beginning when I wrote Tom Ames' Prayer when I was 20. I wrote Ben McCullough when I was 20. Long story songs with pretty complicated stories, are really easy for me, and mine are shorter than most people's are. I learned to do it I got better and better and better at it. So I had to unlearn this sort of killer instinct of going for what's important about this and getting it said as fast as possible, and to try to stretch it out into something that saving something, holding something back, in the arc of telling a story. I've learned about it from, acting's helped. You know, I've only worked with, as the only writers I've worked with are people like David Simon and Tim Blake Nelson and George Pelecanos, and you know, I get to say every acting job I've ever had, I got to go out and say really incredibly well-written words, except for, well, even the stuff on 30 Rock. I was on 30 Rock this week, and it was like, I did performing the Ballad of Kenneth DePage. Check it out on YouTube. It's hilarious, which I didn't write, but it's that deal of, and that's comedy. The thing about being involved in comedy for somebody like me, that's invaluable for an artist because it helps vaccinate you against being taken too seriously and taking yourself too seriously.
Question over here.
Yeah, I just want to mention, Steve, that when Lynn and I were writing the notes that I didn't write down, we were writing it and watching 30 Rock, and then you just came on at the end.
Right,
And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? It was amazing.
It's one of the cool things about living in New York. It's just there in Queens, you know.
So great.
So I just wanted to speak to both of you and ask you both this question because Zoe, we met at a function not too long ago, and I just already felt like I knew you or something because you're such a easy to know person. And Steve, I saw you perform in 2004 in D.C. at a protest for the war, and I felt immediately close to you as well. And I felt like, wow, you guys are famous, you're celebrities also, and yet you're so on the level with regular people, the people who you document in street photography, and the people who you write about. So I was wondering, do you guys find that you're able to move between these sorts of worlds or use celebrity as a power, as something that you can use along with the art that you create?
I can answer that because I'm really not that famous. And now that I have this show, I seem to be more and more famous. So I have not had the chance to think about how I can use my celebrity to get in. So this is a great moment in which you're seeing the start of that. Believe me. Local commercials, I don't know where it's going to go. Benefits, it's out of control. So I'm pulling it all the way. So that's my thought.
You know, I'm not that famous either, and
Oh, you're
it's
out
like,
of your mind.
well, not. I'm actually recognized more for having been in The Wire and having been in Treme in relatively small acting roles than I am for making records for the better part of 30 years, and I'm okay with that. My audience is the size that it is because of conscious decisions I made as an artist and living in the country that I do. It's also not everybody wants to hear about anything but girls and cars in their songs. And, when I die, they're going to figure out I wrote way more songs about girls than I did anything else. I'm not really a political songwriter. I'm just an artist who's a very political person. And that's, and I was raised in the 60s and 70s, and it never occurred to me that the stuff that you experience and the stuff that you live through isn't supposed to be part of your art. I never even asked myself those questions. I don't, I think the idea that, now I can't say this because I'm not that famous. I can't speak for people that are. Maybe it is really a horrible thing for them and to not be able to go out of the house. But, the fact is that my guess is they don't really live in a different world than we do. They live in the same fucking world that we do, and they have to deal with the same stuff that we do. And, some get it, some understand that they've been really incredibly blessed and incredibly lucky. I mean, there are people in my family that think I won the lottery or something, and I worked my ass off to be what I am and to do it. But I also make way more money. It's an embarrassing amount of money for a borderline Marxist doing something that I really love doing, and I'm very, very grateful for that. So.
Dreams coming true. Dreams coming true.
Well, I want to pick up on one thing that Steve said and ask a question myself of both of you, which is that you both seem to see a clear, if fuzzy, distinction between your art and your activism. And I don't think it's easy for anybody, whether you're an artist or not, to talk about the differences. But why and how is your art different from your activism? I guess I'll start with why. Why does it have to be distinct, or why do you want it to be distinct?
I'm not sure that I do want it to be distinct. I'm not sure I make that. I do what I do. When I was writing John Walker's Blues, I wrote John Walker's Blues in the middle of the night in Malmo, Sweden, and started out by going to Islam.com and trying to figure out how to sing Surah 47, in Arabic and for the chorus. And I was making a conscious decision to do something. I knew it was going to alienate people, but it was okay. It was completely and totally okay. So somebody suggested that I did it because thought I was going to sell a lot of records, capitalizing on that. I'm like, dude, you must be out of your mind. Because it was, I sold less records. I sold markedly less records than the record before. And for a couple records. And I no longer was able to book any national television for 2 more record cycles. And then finally that came back. There was an effective blacklist that existed. Shows, I'd never failed to book all of the network, shows.
That was organized? I'm just curious.
It's not organized. It was people that were doing their job that were afraid of getting in trouble. And so they just weren't. I was somebody that some people in mainstream entertainment weren't going to go near. But I'm lucky. Nowadays, deciding you're going to be a singer-songwriter is a lot like somebody that's 18 and decides they're going to be a singer-songwriter today. It's like deciding it's almost like deciding you're going to be a poet. It's not quite, but it's like deciding you're going to be a bluegrass player or play jazz. These are decisions that you're making. That when you decide any of those things, those pure forms of art, it's like the audience is smaller. There's less ways to charge people for it. So you're making a decision, okay, I'm going to do something that's incredibly hard and I'm never going to master and I'm never going to make a fucking dime. That's what I'm going to do with my life. And that's so un-American, I mean, what we've taught. And the biggest problem, the positive side of this, and what I hope that my kids have learned, and I started over having kids again. I got a 21-month-old at home. And I don't, what I hope they learn is that what's wrong with us right now, why we're going through all this shit, is because we have values that tell us that those things aren't important. The idea that we've raised a couple of 3 generations of kids, and we got to take, it's us, it's not them, but there's a couple of generations of Americans that have made every decision that they've ever made about what they were going to be when they grew up based on how much money they were going to make. People don't become doctors because it's a calling in this country. They do other places in the world, folks. Doctors make really good money and drive really nice cars in England, but they don't get rich just because they're doctors and they go to the same country club as the lawyers. It's just a totally different thing. Those values count. And so I think I don't separate those two things. I always was going to be this kind of artist as long as a corporation was willing to give me money to make art, and I didn't have to, sometimes I'd tell them that I was going to do what they wanted me to do, but I never did it. And, and now I have to go to other places for money. I still got a halfway decent record deal, but there's going to come a day when I'm going to have to just put my songs up on the internet and that'd be the end of it, and I'm not going to get paid for them anymore. It's probably going to happen in my lifetime, the way things are going. But it's about us. It's not about them. It's about us standing up for stuff and us not allowing our priorities to get any further out of whack than they already are.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. I think that the idea of, I think in terms of thinking about separating one's own political life, which is intrinsic at core of self for me, and then my own work is actually an impossibility. But in presenting my work, I'm very interested in it not necessarily being didactic and being open-ended so that people can read into it. And I think that makes a big difference in terms of allowing people to kind of read their own story and their own narrative into this moment. And my hope with that is that that generates much more thought about civic engagement and what it means to be together in a society as people together. And one of the things I try and pay close attention to not having really extremely overt political statements within the body of my work as photographs. And part of that is because I think people read that and they immediately turn it off and don't put enough thought into kind of thinking about why is this here? And that's really what I'm thinking. I want the viewer to do the work as to what does this mean in terms of presentation. And so while they're completely connected and all of the things, my work is very personal, and of course it's all part of same self. And it's something that while it's not separate at all, it's also conscious that I don't want to actually try and talk to somebody. And sometimes I think that means it's talking down to somebody by not giving them the opportunity to come to it on their own.
There's a question right there. There's a mic coming. I'll say while it's on the way down that I think you both also, you offer really good examples of simply not asking permission to do what you're going to do or to say what you want to say, and that's hard to do in this country sometimes, but it's sort of self-imposed. As you were saying, Steve, I work here at this major institution, which I love, and I'm very happy to work here, but I find that there's often sort of a self-censoring that goes on. Not because of any edict handed down from above, but just because it's sort of a mindset that we have. And if you just go forward and speak your mind and make the work you want to work,
if you have any job making art in this country, and you're getting, especially if you're getting a salary for it, or if you have a certain amount of work like I do, it's a very real fear that if you say the wrong thing, that could stop happening. And so, we censor ourselves. That's one of the biggest problems. It's been one of the biggest problems in this society. There was no blacklist was necessary. No, if official blacklist existed in the 50s, it wasn't necessary in the run-up to and the aftermath of the Iraq War. It wasn't necessary. We censored ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Question up there?
My question's for Steve. Who was your role model in the folk singing world, and why?
Well, Bob Dylan invented my job and then immediately took the majority of the air out of the room, as soon as he did it. And it's still, I don't think anybody's ever, I don't think it's gonna happen in my lifetime that we see anybody that will have as much effect on what I do as Bob did. Even what we call him Dylan the whole time I was growing up, and we call him Bob now. And you know why? Because Bob woke up about 15 years ago and decided that he was going to be called Bob. And I really believe that. Towns was much more of an effect on me because I met him, I knew him, and I sat in the same room with him. So, the stuff I heard on records, my first Bob Dylan record was Highway 61, probably just because of my age. I'm 57 as of about a week ago, and I don't, but I had a drama teacher in high school that gave me my first copy of The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. And that was a life-changing thing for me. I loved the Bob Dylan records that I had, but for one thing, it sounded like something I could do because I didn't have an electric guitar. And, even the Stones and Beatles stuff I was into was the stuff with acoustic guitars on it. So it's that thing when you're coming up, as an artist and as a person, certain things are impressive. So there was Dylan originally, but then as soon as I met Townes, then I knew Guy Clark. And I was pretty young. I was 17 when I met Townes. I was 19 when I met Guy. And then, I met, the next thing I knew, I was sitting in the same room with Mickey Newberry and Neil Young and anybody else that came through Nashville. It was kind of a university for songwriters when I got there. And that stuff becomes much more impressive to you, So it was the idea. It was a good time. Songwriting was considered to be an art and a form of literature, and I'm not sure whether that's true in the mainstream anymore, but you certainly can do it that way, and I try to still to this day.
One question up there in the center. Oh, okay.
I like your moderation.
That's fine, yeah.
Creator.
Then there's one down here after that.
So with that question about celebrity and what you do with it, you just kind of poo-pooed the question, but I saw a film called When You Break the Skin, and that seemed like a very particular thing that you did with the spotlight. And I wondered what the decision-making process was like in making that film, which was so wonderful and so democratic.
That film was made. It was made a couple years ago, and when I had an exhibit at the Philadelphia ICA, and the film was made specifically because there was a summer program with a number of kids who were aging out of foster care, and they were working on making this particular film about me. And the film kind of just grew and grew and grew as the project went on, as often as want to happen with me, is that it started as this little thing and then ended up at this massive, massive thing. And so the intent of the film was not really to be a film about me. It was kind of about me and the kids' lives and the exchange that they were having, kind of this moment in which they're moving out of, they're essentially becoming adults with no support system. They're aging out of their homes. And so that film was really not necessarily something that had begun to be about me or my work or anything even remotely like that, but it was really just about the relationships that I had with the young adults who were working on the film. And it was supposed to be like 10 minutes long, and of course then it was an hour and a half. Yeah, that's how I roll. So it was, the reason why it became, and it's not really a film that anyone would really see. It was kind of just shown a couple of times. It was just shown at the ICA once, and there's a couple copies of it around. But the thing that came out of it that was awesome is that I continued to have a relationship with a number of the young people who worked on the film, and one of them is Sharday Laverty. She's on one of the billboards in the Billboard Project. And so I met her through making this film and this project, which I didn't really make, I should say. It's about me and about me working on this project. And Sharday's somebody, she's one of the many who I kept, of the young people I kept in touch with. And the film itself was not necessarily of great importance to me, but the relationships that came out of it were really, that they mattered a great deal, and I really benefited a lot from knowing them. And I especially benefited a lot from knowing Sharday, who has become an important part of my life and had participated in I-95 for several years after I met her, and who I continue to have a relationship with. And so that's really how, I don't know if that answers the question about celebrity. I mean, because really only like 5 people saw that film, so, which is, I mean, my mom's here, she's seen it, so I feel like, thanks, Mom. So, and my lady. But really, it wasn't a big celebrity making thing. It wasn't moving myself up into local commercial level like I'm hoping.
Zoe, I have a distant but related question, and I'd like you to talk briefly about MegaWords, whom you and the museum invited to have a space here during the run of your exhibition. The MegaWords space is just outside this auditorium. If you take a right when you leave the auditorium, you can go visit it. But Zoe, I think that speaks really directly to how you see art and activism coming together.
Right.
So tell us about it.
Yeah, I will tell you about it. Is MegaWords where your book is getting sold? Is that where that's happening?
No,
Where's
it's
that
right over here.
It's right over there, and then you can just, it's good, because it's close. It's close in proximity, so I just had to just get a little plug in there. MegaWords is a space, it's 2 guys, it's Dan and Tony. They are both awesome. And MegaWords' kind of worldview is very much talking about civic space and how we navigate the world, and they talk about it through a number of different ways, one of which is producing a free magazine that's a giveaway, but also in kind of creating these pop-up places that are not just installations, but places for people to actually have civic engagement. So here at the museum, there was this spot outside, which for my entire life had been a payphone and a bench, and then I think there was a water fountain in it. And so that's, what was there? Yeah, I mean, that's going back, like, I know this for like maybe 35 years, this same space. And it was a horrible and foreboding area that was like a horrible threshold where you're just transferring over, like where Sirius Black is just falling right into the other world. Anyway, so MegaWords took over the space, and they actually transformed it into a place that is a place for people to come out. It's very welcoming. People are able to come in and hang out. There's books for sale. They're all at face value, and the idea is not so much commerce, but the idea of exchange of ideas and the hope that people will take something away. And so I'm really very, very grateful for them, the way that they changed and altered the space. And I mean, I've known the museum my whole life. It's made such an unbelievable shift in this particular space. I can't even believe it. And one of the things that's so, I think, really very moving is that it's so small. It's such a small shift in space, but makes such a big difference in terms of the feel of that hallway, that it's very inspiring to think about how sometimes these small things can make a very large impact.
We have time for one more question from the audience.
This lady down here.
Oh, okay. There you go. Let's go to this lady in the purple vest down here.
Yeah, my high school English teachers. We're talking about true grit.
Always. Yeah, I brought you some things from your high school.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Philadelphia High School for Girls. Very proud of Zoe. And we still have an orchestra, but barely, because they're talking about eliminating instrumental music teachers in Philadelphia schools. But we do have something that was not there in the 80s when Zoe was a student, and that's a Gay Straight Alliance group. It's been there 10 years, so.
That's what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. And I just will give a shout out to Girls High, which is my high school, all girls high, which I think might have actually turned me gay.
Okay,
That's
is there?
not true. It was just a successful place to be gay, even in the 80s. So.
Is there one more question? Here we go, right down here. Mike, please, to this lady.
Can you talk about the frustration that you must feel in your activism at a time where compassion and empathy are perceived as weaknesses almost? As far as I know, the only senator that talks about compassion is Bernie Sanders, and I don't think it's a coincidence that he's independent.
Yeah, and a socialist.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, we like I said, it's part of the problem I was talking about before. We've raised a couple of generations that really believe that they're going to be destitute if they make less than $100,000 a year. I heard two kids, private school kids of friends of mine a couple of years ago, having a conversation about new money and real money, you know, talking about their parents and talking about friends of theirs and their parents. We bail on the public school system. You know, look, there's just realities that we have to face, and we're going to keep raising, you know, mean-spirited little overachievers that drive the country into the ditch if we keep going the way that we're going. And it's not, kids can't help it. They depend on us, you know, and we have to lead by example. We have to, you know, some point somebody's going to have to say, no, I'm going to put my kids in public school. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to support public schools. And at some point, my wife and I are at war right now because we have a kid that hell, I might not even live to see start school, but he's 21 months old, and if I am alive, he's going to PS 41. Now, saying that, PS 41 is a great school in my neighborhood in New York City, and that's not true of every, and if our mayor has anything to say about it in New York City, it won't be true forever. It's all of these things. These are really, really hard questions. It's about fundamentally changing the way that we do things. We've made teachers into scapegoats. Look, I grew up in Texas. I've got an 8th grade education. And the only thing that saved my ass was a couple of teachers that figured out I wasn't going to be around very long and made sure that I read the right things and listened to the right records while they still had me under the roof. They knew I wasn't going to stay there. I mean, all my English teachers were football coaches. It was Texas. But it's not, it's really fundamental stuff. It starts, you have a choice. You can raise somebody that stops and gives $1 to somebody just because you got $1 in your pocket and it's not going to take anything away from you. Or you can raise a hero to everyone, like, it's kind of I heard one famous basketball player, talking about another famous basketball player one night, and I won't even name names, and he said they're both really, really rich and two of the best basketball players, that ever played. And he said, "No, man, he's cheap." And he said, "Well, what do you, the moderator said, "Well, what do you mean he's cheap?" He says, "I mean, we were walking down the street, and a guy asked me for money, and I gave him, $5, or $10 or whatever. And the other guy, who was even richer, said, 'You shouldn't do that.' And he said, 'Why?' He said, 'Because if he can ask you for money, he can say, "Can you have fries with that?" You want fries with that. And it's that kind of, those are who our heroes are. And it's nothing against sports. I'm kind of a one sport guy. I don't watch anything but baseball. But it's about, we really do believe that stuff is way more important than it really is. We really do believe that there's something, it's like you said, that it's weak to be compassionate. And the truth of the matter is, these are really hard times we're getting ready to come through, and they're not going to end in the next 4 years, and they're not going to end in the 4 years after that. Nothing has happened like this since the 30s. And, nobody's been able to show me how we're coming out of it, without a lot more pain, a lot more people out of work. And it's going to be up to us. And things are going to tear down to a point that we will have the opportunity to rebuild to some degree. And it's up to us to wake up tomorrow morning and decide that we're going to rebuild it in some other fashion than what we've gotten ourselves into over the last, 40 years. Make no mistake, in the 30s, a form of socialism had to be adopted in this country because it became an imperative. And ever since then, the people that built this country and the people that have always been powerful in this country set about trying to dismantle. They said, okay, we can't stop this now, but we're never going to let it happen again. Well, I think we're there again. And I think we're going to have to do something different in order to build everything back. And it's up to us.
Mm-hmm. Once again, I totally agree. Good night.
Thank you, Zoe and Steve.